I do want to ask as we get started, I'm going to introduce our primary speaker, tell you a little bit what to expect here. But as we get started, we do ask you to put away electronic devices. If you're taking notes on a computer, that's fine, but otherwise, phones and computers, if you don't mind putting those away so we can be focused on the topic at hand. My name is John Barton, and one of the things I do is I direct the Center for Faith and Learning on Pepperdine's campus. And what the Center for Faith and Learning does a lot of things, but one of the things that we try to do is to keep discussions alive on our campus about important issues. Issues that are important to our society, issues especially that help us bring together academic learning, academic scholarship with faith and issues of faith and issues that are important in our society. And so one of the things we do every year is we have a series of convo events, and many of you may know this if you've been here the last few weeks, but this is the third in a three-part series that we've done for convo. And we are highlighting some of our faculty members and recent publications that they have. And so every week we've had a different faculty member or staff member talk about a book that they've written, and then we've had a discussion around it. And tonight we are thrilled and we're privileged, happy to be focusing on and listening to Professor Rosalind Satchel. Many of you know her and love her. If you don't know her, you will know her and love her in just a little while. Professor Satchel is a great blessing to our campus and to what Pepperdine does, to Pepperdine's mission. And tonight she's going to be sharing with us some of the content and some of the challenges and insights from her new book called What Movies Teach About Race. And Rosalind is going to speak for a little bit about that, and then she's going to introduce some members of a panel that are going to discuss this book with her and for us, including a special guest that we have from off campus. But as we get started, please welcome to the microphone Professor Rosalind Satchel.
All righty. Hi, y'all. I'm Southern. I say, hey, y'all, and I expect y'all to respond. Hey. How y'all doing? Good. Thank you. I feel like I'm at home. There's so many familiar faces here. I'm so grateful that you came out this evening. I am Rosalind Satchel. I would say I'm an assistant professor of communication here, except that I recently found out that I've gotten a promotion to associate professor, and I'm thrilled about that. I thought I'd mention it. I teach in the communication division. I teach intercultural communication, media law, and just about anything else you can imagine. I teach in our social action and justice colloquium here in the humanities division as well. And many of you I've seen in class, and some of you I hope I get a chance to see in class in the future. It's going to be an exciting time for me to share with you a little bit about my work. Before I get into that though, I want to just mention to you that when Stephanie Cupp came to me and asked me about speaking with you this evening, it was a great honor for me. It was a great honor for a number of reasons. First off being that she's actually one of my very best friends. And so that meant the world to me. It also meant the world to me because John and Sarah Barton have likewise become two very dear friends to me. And so with John being the new director of the Center for Faith and Learning and Stephanie being the coordinator, and it meant that, you know, it's one thing when strangers invite you in to do something, but when your friends who know your issues and your flaws still think enough of you to invite you in, it means the world. So thank you both for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to invite some people who I think so very highly of, that I want to be in conversation with them this evening about my work. Now, I'll start out by telling you a little bit about my book, my research, my path that has gotten me here, in hopes that you'll find some nugget in that story that will inspire you and help you as you go forward in your journey, because it was somebody that did that for me. And so I take that legacy very important. I feel like I have a responsibility to pay that forward and to actually give back some of that which has been given to me by some of the most amazing teachers, professors, scholars, ministers, everyday, ordinary people who have helped me through. And so I'm sharing from that place this evening. It's from a very simple, humble place that is really far more about us building together. So in building, I had an opportunity to pick some conversation partners. I invited Douglas Kellner from the University of California, Los Angeles. At UCLA, Doug Kellner is an amazing mastermind who has done so much in terms of publication that I can't imagine how one makes the time to be as productive as he is in presenting very thoughtful and very critical, deep thought about what's happening in our society, and to present that in a way that is accessible to people like you and me. You see, when I came into a PhD program, I went into that program as an activist. I've been a community organizer working on human rights issues throughout the United States and then throughout the world. I found my greatest joy on college campuses working with students like you. I found that that was what I felt to be a very clear sense of my calling, my purpose in this world. But I knew that working at that public interest law firm where I was putting in 60, 70 hours a week, sometimes 80, and really not having much to show for it because we were working so hard against a political system that did not see the most vulnerable among us as equal to the most powerful among us. And in working for human rights in that kind of experience and in that kind of environment, what it left me with was a sense of disillusionment about whether we could make any difference in the world at all. I found myself with a book in my hand with a chapter written by Doug Kellner. And it was about cultural studies, multiculturalism, and the media industry. And I read that chapter, and it harkened back to my days working at TriStar Pictures when I first came out of college, with this idealism that I could use filmmaking to change the world, that this most powerful medium had such broad reach and such deep impact in people's lives and in communities, that I could use this to help everyday, ordinary people. I lost hope in that somewhere along the way, but when I read Doug's research and I read his essay, it meant that there was something that someone like me could do. And I read from that chapter on to another essay, to an article, to book upon book upon book. And when I tell you the list is so long that I couldn't count all of the books and articles that Doug has written, I mean that very literally. He has given his life the past 40 years at least to writing about how it is that the industries, the media industries in particular, the culture industry, the mass culture industry, and the mass communication industry and research and the machine behind it all impacts you in the way you think about me. And the way that those larger systems work together to reify the power of the powerful and to continue to keep marginalized those who are marginalized. And in that process, I started to build what first became a paper. And it was for a class, much like the classes you take. And then it became some ideas about a dissertation. Then it became a dissertation. And now it's become a book. And I had the opportunity to reach out to my literary mentor who never heard my name before and I'd never talked to before. And I simply sent him an email and said, "You're one of my literary mentors. I'm so grateful for your work. Would you be willing to come and talk with me about my book?" And he said, "Yes." And I was profoundly moved by that generosity of spirit because this man travels all over the country, all over the world regularly, talking about his research, talking about his scholarship. He is world renowned, and that is in no way an overstatement. Doug Kellner, I want to thank you for being here with us at Pepperdine University this evening and for being in conversation with me. And I'll invite you up as soon as I get done with introducing our next conversation partner and talking a little bit about the book. Eric Wilson, likewise, has been a dear friend since he joined us here at Pepperdine as our associate chaplain. Eric Wilson and his wife, Sharita Wilson, are an amazing contribution to the spiritual life and academic life at Pepperdine. I have been in conversation with him around his kitchen table, in his office, in my office. I've had him in as guest speakers in my classes, and every time he wows me. And so many of you in this audience today can talk about how accessible he is and how insightful he is and how often he will invite any of us into his office to sit down for lengthy conversations about how it is that our faith, our sense of spirituality, our identity in that does connect and inspire concrete work and activism in the world. How it is that we can make a difference, how one person can make the world a better place if only we believe. And his book, Faith, has been one of the most important parts. I've actually put it up on my desk now, and I leave it for my students to see when they walk in, and they come in and they look and they go, "Oh, I didn't know he did a book. Oh, I didn't know." And I'm like, "Yeah, you don't know who we have right here, the type of treasure that we have in Eric Leroy Wilson." And I'm so very grateful for his friendship, his collegiality, and his insight. He is a pastor, preacher, and I want for all of you to be encouraged this evening after having this conversation here to seek him out and have some one-on-one conversation going forward. His thoughts are broad. He is a film studies professor. He has been, he brings an amazing thought process from a philosophical background and a philosophy background, much like Doug. And so you will have a chance to think about how philosophers are not just boring old white men today. You'll have a chance to see some exciting old white men and black men and exciting black women who bring philosophy home in a way that you might not have thought that philosophy could be life-changing. Now, I bring this to you from that vantage point because the work that I do and the research that I've done, and Eric, I'm going to invite you up in a minute as well. This book is entitled, "What Movies Teach About Race, Exceptionalism, Erasure, and Entitlement." Why did I pick that title? Well, I'll tell you very honestly, it wasn't my intention going into this at all. Actually, this book has had about 4 or 5 different titles along the way. But what I found after I did this research really blew me away because I'd for years been talking about what I saw. You know, I go to the movies and I see everything and everybody except folks that look like me. And the folks that look like me were there only as domestics or criminals. That was problematic in and of itself. But all I had was anecdotal information, a lifetime of escapism and diversion into movies, trying to get away from the dehumanizing experience of being the one black girl in the classroom, the dehumanizing, isolating experience of being the only African American in the boardroom, the frustrating and alienating experience of being the only African American woman with the level of education or with this coming from the type of economic or socioeconomic background that I do come from, and having people assume very much just on my presentation that I'm some round the way girl. That type of stereotyping and really marginalization in the most individuated sense was my experience in my everyday life. And it made me feel like nobody really understood me. It made me feel like nobody really had a sense of who I really was. But I would escape into movies. My friends and I would go to the mall or go to whatever the movie complex was at that time, and we'd go and we'd live in a fantasy world, and we'd imagine that we too could be Luke Skywalker, that we could be Elliot riding off on a bike into the sky, that we could be superheroes, that we could come to the rescue and people would look at us and love us, that we could be the beautiful woman everybody fought over. And then we walk back into the jarring experience of simply walking back into the lobby of the movie theater and have people brush past us like we weren't there, walk through us as though they expected automatically that we would be the one to step aside and never them. People who would call us out of our names, racial epithets that we were simply devastated by, because those epithets had a history. Those words had images that tied together with them. Those words and images tied together often with themes that never seemed to be positive about people like me. So that's what I studied. Images, words, themes, and actions. I looked at images, words, themes, and actions in 10 of the 20 most lucrative, most viewed, most globally sought after films of all time. And the reason I picked these 10 was because it was a very interesting process. I've been reading Doug's work, and Doug kept saying we have to come at this work from a multi-perspectival approach. And what he was challenging researchers to do was to bring together not only the content analysis, looking at and counting, measuring images, words, themes, and actions, describing them, exploring them, interrogating them, and doing the deep textual analysis, but also putting that in conversation with the audiences and what the audiences were saying about those films and how the audiences were responding and decoding the content of those films. And I kept going back and forth with the requirements that were there. And I said, well, a lot of people are out there doing surveys about what audiences think about films. But one way we can be clear about what audiences think about films is by looking at which films draw the largest global audiences. So I went to an industry ranking of the highest viewed films. I looked at the top 20, and I actually was stunned to realize that there were only 3 directors, 3 studios representing 3 transnational media conglomerates, 3 corporations, that were responsible for 10 of those top 20 films. I said, well, that's a compelling finding about audiences and audience reception and audience response. I will lead with that, let that become my sample, and then take that information and decode it. And doing a critical discourse analysis allowed me to not only count and measure and do that kind of quantitative approach that you may have heard of in some of your research methods classes that you tuned out. I know you did. It's okay. I probably did too when I was in undergrad. But I needed that information because I was able to take the counting and measuring and then extrapolate from the texts and the theories and the scholarship that was out there, some dominant ideas and concepts that were also present in those films, and put those two in conversation, and then lay over it a power analysis. You know, power analysis, that thing that you do when you walk into the classroom and you challenge the authority of your professor. You know how you do this. I know you know how you do this because you're in my classes. I know. And so it's that thing that happens when you say, I know something and I'm bringing something to the table. There's no empty glasses and full pitchers in this room. I have something to contribute to the discussion. And what I did was I took a power analysis and said, wow, who's contributing to the discussion? What are the issues of power that are at play here? Whose vision of the world is being presented? And then what do the rest of us look like who don't look like those people who are envisioning that world? What I found was that there's certain things that certain people can do, and there's certain people that can't do those same things. Ultimately, in these films, as you might imagine, if you would think back on Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you think back on films like Jurassic Park, E.T., 4 of the Star Wars series, Titanic, there's certain things that white men can do with impunity in these films, without any penalty, without any consequence, without ever being arrested, without ever being detained, including, as in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones goes through all the continents and basically rapes and pillages all of the ancient antiquities. And nobody ever arrests him for that. It's amazing to me. And this becomes one of the most celebrated heroes of my childhood. But when people of color do the very same thing, when women try to do the very same thing, when people who are not heterosexual try to do the same things, when people who have differing abilities do the same things, when people who don't believe like you believe or you believe, people who are not Western do the same things, they must be annihilated. They are arrested, they are detained, they are killed, they are destroyed. And that is teaching a lesson. Films have a socialization function, and that's ultimately one of the most important findings from my book, is that they're teaching us very much as a pedagogical effort how to relate to one another. Who is to be the superior? Who is to be the submissive? And what happens when people step out of those places and rankings? I offer it to you this evening just as an idea, a quick summary of a book that is a lot more than just that. And I offer to you some of the most brilliant minds to discuss it a little bit more. Doug Kellner and Eric Wilson, will you join me? Doug, we'll come to you first if you don't mind. And if you could share with us your thoughts. I asked Doug to read the book, and he's working on a wonderful book himself, and he took a little bit of time to take a look at mine, and I'm so grateful. I've asked him to share with us his thoughts, and then we'll come to Eric, and Eric will share with us his thoughts as well, and we'll have a little bit of time for conversation afterwards.
Okay, actually, I think I won't use the microphone. You all can hear me okay. First of all, this was such a great privilege to meet Rosalind and to read her book, What Movies Teach About Race, which is one of the most exciting 20 books that I've read about Hollywood film in some years. So I'm going to spend most of my comments remarking on the book and what I think its contributions are. But Rosalind's personal comments about film sort of inspired me that I should say a few words about how I, as a philosopher, got into film and the importance of studying film, since I think you all are, a lot of you are film students, want to make films, be a film maker. My first, well, first of all, I think it was movies when I was a kid. I grew up in Temple City, California, which was then a totally white middle-class suburb, and then went to Valley, well, first to Falls Church, Virginia, another completely white suburb, and then Valley Stream, New York, where I did have experiences of mixed ethnicities, but it was really films that introduced me to the variety and diversity of American culture, where I got my first senses of African American life, Latino, Asian American, working class, or for that matter, rich lives that were all different from my middle class existence. So Hollywood film can be a form of cultural pedagogy that teaches you about the world, that teaches you about the diversity of the U.S. and the rest of other parts of the world. In fact, I was really going to Columbia University in New York in the 1960s that I discovered world cinema that sort of opened my eyes to the diversity and excitingness of the world. I lived just down the street from the Thalia Theater and the New Yorker Theater, and so the first year I went to Columbia, every day I went to the Thalia that showed classics of world cinema from Japan, from China, from India, from all the European countries, and that gave me the desire to travel, to experience the world. And sure enough, as soon as I got a graduate fellowship to study in Germany, I started traveling the world and seeing the world, and it was movies that really helped, get me into experiences and cultures that otherwise I wouldn't have had access to. Now, as for Rosalind's book, What Movies Teach Us About Race, the first thing I like about it is the title. What movies teach us about race? Because I see movies as a film, as a form of cultural pedagogy. The movies, as I just tried to, as both of us illustrated in our comments, teach you about the world, teach you masculinity, femininity, teach you values, beliefs, role models, give you a variety of different experiences. But you need critical film studies as a form of counter pedagogy, because not everything that film teaches is good. That some films teach racism, sexism, homophobia. In fact, that to some extent was classic Hollywood cinema. And it really wasn't until the 1960s that you got more diverse experiences of race, partly because of African American filmmakers, and I'm thinking obviously of Spike Lee. Rock music too, for my generation, really was an eye-opener. Actually, my great cultural experiences before film was rock and roll. When I was a kid in Long Island, I went to the Brooklyn and Times Square Paramount, and honest to God, I saw Fats Domino, Little Richard, Chuck, the late Chuck Berry, who else? Jerry Lee Lewis, the Everly Brothers, just a variety and diversity of music from other races, parts of the country, etc. So I want to give popular music as well as film to sort of privilege it as a moment of cultural pedagogy. But again, you need a critical pedagogy to critically examine, as Rosalind does in her book, images of race, images of class, of sexuality, of gender, because films can misteach you.
Right.
They can teach you, again, things like racism, sexism, homophobia, as well as presenting positive images of being a man, being a woman, different professions, being a teacher, being a lawyer, being a policeman, whatever. Now, films can also, as a form of pedagogy, teach you about the world and, again, experiences and cultures you might not see. For instance, Nightcrawler can teach you about the underworld of LA and about local news production. If you don't know about, how news is produced and journalism. Birdman can teach you about Broadway theater that I obviously loved when I was in New York, among other things. Whiplash can teach you about wrestling, the super rich, etc. So that Hollywood films really can be a form of pedagogy. In fact, using this year's Oscar films, I would argue that Moonlight gives you insights into gay black male youth and the issues and challenges about sexuality, race, etc. La La Land teaches you that the drive for success in work could destroy relationships, as well as teach you about, the film world and the theater world, etc. Fences can introduce you to the plays of the great August Wilson. Actually, we're privileged, and I've been privileged in Los Angeles, that the Mark Paper Forum has done every August Wilson play. So I've been seeing his film. But this is the first film of his great plays, and it's thanks to Denzel Washington that, this film was made and introduced August Wilson's work into American culture. And I think HBO now is doing a whole series of August Wilson's plays that shows the struggle of black families and individuals against racism and societal oppression. And as I said, every film gives us different models of how to be a man, how to be a husband, how to be a woman, how to, work, etc. The Academy Award Screw Up, remember the Oscar Moonlight and La La Land, teaches you, turn off your cell phones, don't do texting. Actually, my great cell phone story, or inappropriately having cell phones on, is an Al Pacino story down at the Mark Taper Forum. So I'm seeing Eugene O'Neill Huey. It's like a great American play. It's a one-man performance. Huey's a drunk. So Pacino's doing this unbelievable performance, and the guy in about the fourth row, his cell phone turns off.
That was Pacino.
Pacino stops his talk, gives the evil eye. This dude learned his lesson. You don't have your cell phone. How to get into that? Anyway, so films being a form of cultural pedagogy. Now, going back to Rosalind's book, I like that she begins her book by citing Black Lives Matter and Oscars So White, which grounds her work in contemporary political struggles as well as the historical context. It's a great historical contextualizing of films within the context of American culture, Hollywood, the auteurs, some of the great directors, Spielberg, Lucas, James Cameron. But like Black Lives Matter just electrified U.S. and perhaps global politics after the shootings of African Americans in Ferguson, Baltimore, etc., producing a movement to fight against racism. And I see Rosalind's book as part of that struggle against racism, that part of Black Lives Matter that she documents in her book by showing the Hollywood films that show you the diversity and the power of expressions of Black lives. Now, Oscar's So White grounds Rosalind's book in terms of contemporary struggles against race in Hollywood film, but just also in Hollywood. And I think it's interesting that we were talking about this at dinner, that last year or the year before, it was Oscar So White, because there were no African American films nominated, directors, major actors, actresses. But this year it was at least Oscar So Black and White, because there were so many African Americans. But we still don't have Latinos, Asian Americans. There's still not the diversity that is representative of American society. Now, just to indicate some other important motifs in what movies teach about race, I like your concepts of how you laid out racialization, that how groups learn their place in the social hierarchy through Hollywood films. Rosalind also shows how how Hollywood films positions Black people in subordinate positions in relation to white people, and thus practice a form of white supremacy. So I think that's an important critique of Hollywood film, even if the directors are liberal, as most of these guys are. When it comes to race, you know, these guys have their problems, and Rosalind takes on, as I was indicating, big directors like James Cameron, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg. I also like your notion of racial ascription, of how films define people by their color, that again promotes racism and forms of oppression. Now, this analysis is followed by analysis of racial assignation, which was a word that a term I hadn't previously used, which defines what social roles people of color are best suited to play, which, as you point out, is a form of symbolic violence and exclusion and oppression. So I appreciated that aspect of it. Thirdly, I think I'll end with this. There's detailed analysis of racial stereotypes and the way that visual images are bound up with ideologies of racial domination and subordination. So I thought this was one of the best analyses I've read about how visual imagery helps purvey different ideologies of racism. So basically, you learn how to read films critically from Rosalind's book, and so it really is a form of cultural pedagogy that I recommend to all of you to read. So, thank you.
Thank you, Doug. It means so much to hear that from you, in large part because I know one of the challenges that you've made in the past has been about us creating counter-pedagogical approaches to media and counter-pedagogical media, alternative media, part of what you've done in your career as well, to advance a different perspective and a different approach. What means the world to me is to have the two of you here to have a little bit of conversation about not only these larger complex issues, but how that plays a role in our faith. As many of you know, I'm an ordained minister. I've been ordained in the African Methodist tradition for over 20 years now, believe it or not. When I was your age, when I was in college, I was struggling with God's call on my life, what it was that I was called to purpose to do. And what I have identified is that my work is to work on behalf of the most vulnerable communities among us. That is what God has called me to do. And I do that not only in terms of activism and community organizing, because I do a lot of work in communities. It's important to me to have that proximity to communities that are struggling the very most. But also in my research, in my scholarship, in my classroom, I teach an intercultural media literacy course here that I'll be teaching in the fall. It's called Com 512. Cecilia, you were in there. And one of the things that I do in that media literacy class, number one, you read Doug Kellner's work in that class, as you might remember. But also, we learn how to read films. Eric comes as a former film studies professor. I hope we have a chance to engage him as a film studies professor here as well. I've had him come and talk to my class and offer perspectives on reading films that have been absolutely amazing and reading them from a faith-informed eye. And so I hope that engaging him in this conversation will help us to see that relationship more clearly as well.
Sure, but first let me just say, can we give a hand to Dr. Ross and Satchel? I appreciate one thing that she said. I really think that she is a superhero. I really do, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word. Absolutely powerful, and I got dreadlock goals too. Someday. One of the things that I get a chance to do, and one of the things that I'm honored to do on a day-to-day basis, is to walk alongside of you for your journey, your spiritual journey. Whether that is as a Christian, whether it's you're just trying to seek answers for your life, I get the honor of walking alongside of you all and with a non-judgmental, non-anxious listening presence, and I ask you all questions about how you make sense of your life, okay? You all have taught me a lot in this year and a half that I've been here as it relates to your faith. Because what I've discovered is there's some things that are very common to everybody's spiritual journey. One of the things that's common to everybody's spiritual journey is how do you make meaning in life? I give you my faith opinion as a follower, a devout follower of Jesus Christ, but regardless of whether you're following Christ or anything else, you're trying to make meaning of your life. But what happens when one of the most influential sources in our life, which is pop culture, and specifically media, and specifically film, are the things that are making meaning for you? See, the interesting thing about movies, and you bring this up in your book, which is extraordinary, we seem to think that sometimes, even in fantasy genres, that it's shining a light on reality. That movies teach us reality. But what we're finding is movies shape reality.
Yes.
And it shapes a reality that may or may not be true. But what happens is you're consuming so much of it uncritically, and the very thing that ideally gives you greater sightedness actually starts blinding you to things. Blinding you to power, how power is used, this assignment to certain roles. Because at the core of your spiritual journey is answering the question, not who are you, but who are you really? Who are you really? To cut through all of the clutter of what other people have said you are and what the voices inside of your, okay, y'all probably don't have voices inside of your head. I got voices inside my head that say who I am or what society says that I am. It's cutting through all of that. But what if there is a source that's actually blinding you to the truth of who you truly are? Or more to the point, who the other is. I don't have very much time, so I want to end with just this personal story. I spent a little time for about 15 years as a playwright, screenwriter, as a director, did some acting, and I wrote a play, and it was touring in schools, and I was the playwright that comes afterwards and does the Q&A. And a little kid, probably a little older than Satchel, asked me this question. First question in the Q&A. Who told you could do this? And I was like, what? I was confused by the question. I was like, I'm sorry, man, what do you mean? Well, who told you could be a writer? And the more that I pressed and the more that I started listening deeply to what he's saying was, he was ascribed to a place in his life where he didn't have his own agency to decide what he was going to do.
Yeah.
Where does he get that from? Years later, I go into ministry, and I'm excited about everything that I do, if you can tell. And so I dug deep into ministry work, and I got hired at a church that was pretty dysfunctional, and I started building infrastructure in this church to make it move effectively. And so I started my work, and things are clipping along, and things are going great. And an older white leader of the church came to me, and he asked this question: "Where did you get this from?" I said, "What from?" He said, "All of this data and all of this information and the planning and infrastructure that you put in place, where did you get that from?" And I pressed him. Come to find out, he did not believe a person clothed in this color of skin could actually figure those things out. He had never seen it before. And there was media that would support that image, even if it is not true. So here's my challenge to you all, is to really look at the information that we're taking in from movies, from society, from people all around us, and really critique it. Because at the core of your spiritual journey and your growth as an emerging adult depends on you pushing against the lies that say you can't, you aren't, fear them, buy this. Because if society can cause fear and want in the community's life, then everything could be used for social control. Fear and want. But if you know who you are really, you realize there is not anything that you cannot conquer. And you can live without so much because you are fully capable without a lot of junk. Because at the core of who you are is somebody miraculous. That's all I got.
Professor Wilson is so profound. I tell you, between these two, I get a chance to sit, and it's a wonderful, powerful experience. What I do want to offer that I've heard from Eric and I've read from Doug's work is, as we're having this conversation in the context of faith and learning, that we always are aware that, like media, religion is a contested space.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Like media, religion too
Yes.
is a contested space. What do I mean by that? I teach in the Social Action and Justice program, a course in religious pluralism. Several of you in here have been in that class. And I'm thrilled to see you here because you might want to engage your colleagues who have not been in our class about how it is that within one religious tradition, we can have multiple interpretations about how that tradition manifests itself in the most true sense. See, I follow the tradition of Jesus. In the tradition of Jesus, we see a model of ministry where someone walks through the dust with the outcast and the outsider. The people who were not to be touched, Jesus touched. The people who were not to be included, Jesus included. The people who experienced compassion from no one else in the society, Jesus had compassion on. That is the ministry that I believe we're all called to. I believe that the work that I do in this book is about challenging the way that we see us and them. Mm-hmm. It is about acknowledging that contested space in religion that says that I am one and they are the other. It others people in a way that creates binary oppositions, where in order to be good, us must be good and they must be bad. Where in order to be white, they must be black. In order to be female, they must be male. And that kind of bifurcation, that binary opposition automatically starts to imbue in the other all the negative qualities that we want to project onto them so that we can make ourselves good. We don't have to operate in that type of binary. We can contest that space. What we do in my class, in the religious pluralism class, is that we go out and we visit all types of religious traditions. We are able in that space to not only learn about their tradition, but to reflect on our own. And to talk about the ways in which they don't quite look like we thought they would. And we're also able to recognize, as one student whispered to me today, they know so much about us, and yet we know nothing about them. Why is that? She asked. And so, as I sit here with Doug, who I learned this evening grew up in the Methodist Church, and his family was a part of founding Friendship Methodist Church in Falls Church, Virginia, and he comes out of that background but has had a walk that has allowed him to engage philosophically with a variety of different traditions and cultures. And I know with Eric and I, we've had very similar experiences. I challenge you to contest what you think is normal, to realize that nothing is normative. And the minute we start to create a sense of what is normative and call it normal, we are in that doing, excluding people, making them outsiders, marginalizing them, oppressing them. And I don't think that's where any of us want to be as followers of Jesus, should we be that. And for any of us who are not followers, I know that there is good outside of the Christian tradition as well. And there is room for all of us. That there's no good, bad, binary opposition here. It's us. It's all us. And so if we could start to treat each other like we're all us, we might get to a better place, not only in terms of the content of the movies and media that we consume, but also in terms of the media we produce. Doug, was there anything you wanted to offer to close us out?
No, I think I'm gonna throw it to you,
I'm
Bruce,
sure.
because there was one thing in my comments on your book that I left out, and that is I like the call to action at the end. The last chapter sort of called on Hollywood producers to contest racism, sexism, homophobia, for you to watch films that are citizens to resist this kind of, bias and prejudices in our life. That actually follows up just on, what you were saying. But this takes action. I mean, that was your concept, the call to action of change and contestation of all forms of prejudice, bias, oppression, etc. So I'll just, add that comment.
I appreciate that. I think that's an excellent point for us to think on going forward. My child, Satchel, 6 years old, who just stepped out for a minute, has to live in this world going forward. I'm depending on you to make it better than my generation made it for you. I'm willing to call to action in that very parental guilt kind of way. All right? Y'all need to create a better world, because these babies who are coming along are taking in all of the junk that you and I are critical of. We don't want to reproduce it, but the only way to stop reproducing it is to acknowledge that it's there and to be intentional about changing it. Can you help me with that? Okay, I come from Black church tradition. We kind of do, we either say yes or or you can actually.
We'd like to thank Doug as well, and the Center for Faith and Learning. Do me a favor and remember to, are we scanning out in the back? Got somebody ready to scan out, so please be sure to scan out. God bless you.
And if any of you are interested in the book, you can come see Kendall Wright, my research assistant. He's the most amazing grad student on this campus. Kendall Wright, right here, yes.